Hey, RetconRaider here. Today we're moving on to Van Buren Design Document 4, which covers both the Blackfoot and the Hangdog tribes. The two groups were originally intended to be given their own separate design documents, but at some point during early development, Interplay decided to cut the Hangdog Village, instead combining the two locations into one. It's evident that this document suffered as a result, because neither tribe is fully fleshed out, and the document even includes notes from some of the other writers requesting things like better explanations for certain backstories or plot elements. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. Like some of the other design documents, this one is jammed full of information that was already outdated even at that early stage of development. It regularly makes reference to things that were changed or outright cut from the game, and it's obvious that the writer responsible for this document was still trying to modify the Blackfoot document to bring it in line with the new vision for the game. For example, the document still references the Tibbetts facility as Fort Leavenworth, and refers to the AI inside as Ulysses instead of Odysseus. It also makes regular references to Caesar's Legion, an obvious holdover from when the Legion was intended to play a much larger role in Van Buren. Overall, this makes the document a bit of a mess. It's one of the longer design documents, 88 pages in total, but this is misleading. The document is full of wasted page space, including multiple blank pages, redundant or inefficiently laid out information, and multiple sections that had been marked for deletion. But there's still a lot of potentially interesting information in there, so let's at least take a look at the broad strokes. The Blackfoot Village was intended to be one of the earliest areas in the game. In fact, of all the named locations planned on the world map, it was the second closest to where the player would start the game, increasing the chance that the player would find it early. As a result, the Blackfoot Village strikes a careful balance. The enemies are largely low-threat creatures such as coyotes, mutant rats, and spore plants. The tribals themselves pose a potential threat, but are severely limited by their own lack of resources and technology, with most of their warriors wielding nothing more advanced than leather armor, spears, and the occasional one-shot zip gun or pipe rifle. It's an area that was clearly designed to help the player first get established before moving on to bigger, more ambitious challenges. Many of the quests around the Blackfoot Village involved finding ways to harvest basic resources, marginally improve the player's starting equipment, and to provide the player with the opportunity to start leaning towards their preferred karmic playstyle. But that's not to say that there weren't reasons to revisit the village later in the game. As with many other locations planned in Van Buren, the Blackfoot Village would evolve over time based on the player's decisions. But we'll come back to that in a moment. First, let's spend a bit of time talking about the two tribes that were going to be present at this location, the Blackfoot and the Hangdogs. In comparison to some of the other locations described in the design documents, the background details on the Blackfoot tribe are actually pretty sparse. Although the tribe shares its name with an actual real-world group of Native Americans, the group that would have been featured in Van Buren is actually descended from a group of U.S. soldiers who survived the Great War back in 2077. Led by a man named Captain John Block, the soldiers were forced to find a way to survive after the military had essentially collapsed. Well-trained and equipped for battle, but not for things like farming, they quickly turned to raiding instead. This eventually brought them into conflict with a well-defended ranch, and with both sides unable to overcome the other, the rancher eventually proposed a deal, offering to give the soldiers the supplies they needed in exchange for them no longer seizing supplies from other survivors. Captain Block eagerly accepted the deal, and in doing so, he essentially laid down the groundwork for what would eventually become the Blackfoot tribe. Over time, the soldiers and the ranchers intermingled, and their group also absorbed other travelers as well, including several Native Americans who had survived the war on their reservations. Their group slowly forgot their finer technical skills as they instead focused on living off the land, and their pre-war equipment eventually fell into disrepair. At some point, the original ranch burned to the ground, forcing the group to relocate to a nearby tourist trap, where they still live in 2253. At some point, the group also suffered from a terrible illness, which claimed the lives of most of their young, so the group resorted to stealing youths from surrounding communities and raising them as their own, a tradition which also continues in 2253. By the time Van Buren would have taken place, the Blackfoot tribe would be one of the most feared and hated tribal groups in the Colorado area. Although they weren't technologically advanced, they were roughly 300 strong, with an incredibly broad knowledge base and a cultural diversity born of centuries' worth of their kidnapping and slavery practices. Their entire economy is primarily parasitic, built around preying on passing caravans and weaker tribes, though they do supplement it with mundane things like farming and water trading. To them, there is nothing evil about slavery. It was simply a way of life, and many honored members of their tribe were, in fact, former slaves who had proven their worth to the rest of the tribe. A prime example of this is Kurisu, their current leader, who was herself a former slave. Taken by slave traders back in California, Kurisu was later traded to the Blackfoot tribe, and over the years she proved herself to be a ruthless and capable warrior, becoming so feared and respected that when the tribe's former leader died suddenly, she succeeded in seizing control of the tribe in his stead. In comparison, the Hangdog tribe was rather poorly defined, to the point where there are actually notes in the document requesting the writer to come up with a more detailed backstory. The small amount of information provided states that they're a particularly small tribe, roughly 25 tribals in total, who share territory with the Blackfoot tribe. They revere dogs, treating them as additional members of their tribe and using them in almost every aspect of their lives, including determining who acts as their leader. They do occasionally eat dogs when it's required for the sake of survival, but even then they justify it with their own tribal mythology, consuming the animal's strength and hanging the hides around the edges of their village to ward off evil. Like the Blackfoot tribe, the Hangdogs primarily seem to survive by raiding caravans and other easy targets. Similarly, they also allowed outsiders to join their tribe, as long as they could prove their worth. Where this involved a slave having to win their freedom before being considered a true member of the Blackfoot, one instead would have proved their worth as a hangdog by bringing a puppy to the tribe as tribute. A particularly interesting aspect of the combined tribes is their relation to Caesar's legion and the Daughters of Hecate. In many ways, the Blackfoot almost serve as a tribal counterpart to the more organized and aggressively expansive legion. The two groups are loosely linked in the design document, though the exact nature of this relationship isn't fully defined. It's generally accepted that the Blackfoot tribe pays tribute to the Legion, giving them slaves to take back east to the main Legion camps, but it's never really explained why they do that. It's likely that the document was undergoing heavy revision after the Legion was largely cut from the game. A few offhand references are still made to the Legion in the document, but they tend to be very brief, with little context being offered. For example, one part of the document mentions that the Blackfoot resent having to pay tribute. Another section mentions that Caesar's Legion might kill all of the Hangdog tribe's dogs if they fail to capture Blackjack, a super mutant escapee from the Tibbetts facility. One of the quests marked to be cut from the document even involved uncovering a Legion spy among the Blackfoot tribals. The Daughters of Hecate, on the other hand, were very much still part of the Van Buren campaign setting. I briefly mentioned them in my videos about the Boulder Dome document, where a daughter of Hecate served as the shaman for the Jackals, and another daughter serves much the same purpose in the Blackfoot tribe. I'll spend some more time discussing the Daughters of Hecate when we get to Design Document 6, but for now, suffice to say, they're perhaps the only tribe in the Colorado area who are even more feared and hated than the Blackfoots. The Daughters are led by a mysterious entity known as Hecate, and they force themselves onto other tribes in the region, collecting tribute and sending it back to their own tribe. The tribes they subjugate see it as a necessary evil because those who resist or anger the Daughters of Hecate often find themselves subjected to one disaster after another: crop failures, plagues, infertility, and other similar curses. The Blackfoot and Hangdog tribes grudgingly tolerate the presence of a Daughter of Hecate in their village, but they'll be grateful if the player can find a way to drive her off without causing open hostilities with the rest of her tribe. Perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of this relationship, though sadly one that's largely left unexplored, is the hatred that Caesar's Legion and the Daughters of Hecate have for each other. I have to imagine that if Van Buren's development had been continued, this is something that would have been better worked into the location storyline, because paying tribute to both Caesar's Legion and the Daughters of Hecate would certainly have put the Blackfoot tribe in a very awkward position. Ultimately, like most locations planned for the game, the Blackfoot Tribal Village was intended to be extremely reactive to the player's actions. Depending on how the player approached the quests here, they could accomplish all sorts of things, many of which would have had a permanent effect on the rest of the campaign world. They could help pick a new leader for the tribes, or even take over both tribes as a new leader. They could support the Blackfoot slave-based economy, or try to turn them away from those practices, instead focusing them on less inherently destructive methods of survival. And as with many other locations, the player could also turn the Blackfoot Village into a long-term resource. The village was built atop an old silver mine, which the player could potentially exploit as a long-term source of crafting materials. The player could also uplift the tribe, improving their manufacturing capabilities and teaching them how to use and maintain more advanced technological devices, turning them into a proper trading hub or a finely tuned war machine. But we'll talk about that next time, in the second part of my analysis of the Blackfoot design document. There, we'll take a look at all the quests that were planned for this location, including the ones that were apparently going to be cut during development. But for now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Fallout Van Buren, you can check out all 700 pages of the leaked design documents for yourself by visiting the fan-run wikis. Links are in the description.